This is the Oracle Podcast with Ben Moa. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Oracle. I missed all of you. I'm sorry that it's been so long. February was such a crazy month, filled with lots of struggle, lots of downs, but it's March now, and I know that there's lots of opportunity in March and lots of things to look forward to. So thank you guys for tuning back in. This is the beginning of our first series here at the Oracle. Love at First Sight, as we mentioned, and along the way there'll be other episodes popping up, but we're starting our first series here in this episode that you're about to listen to. It's an interview where we'll be interviewing different couples or people who've experienced relationships and hearing their story on their relationships. So stay tuned. Thank you for being here for our first one of Love at First Sight with Andrel and Kryzia Wisdom. They're going to be sharing how they met and what they've learned and what God's taught them as they grew together, and now they're married. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show.
My name is Andrel Wisdom. I hail from Brampton, Ontario, and I am currently working in commercial real estate investments.
And I am Kryzia Wisdom. I almost got that wrong. I'm Kryzia Wisdom. I am originally from Aurora, Ontario, and I work in marketing communications.
And you guys have been together for, now you guys are married. When did you guys get married?
So we got married July 2018.
And how long were you guys together before that?
Approximately 9 years we were dating.
Dating 9 years or like engaged? Dating?
Okay, so we were dating for 8 years, and then we were engaged for a year, and then we got married in July.
Dating for 8 years?
Yeah.
Are people usually shocked when you guys tell them that?
A little bit, but I mean, once they hear high school, it kind of clears things up, and it's like, oh, wow, from that far back. I get it.
And so you guys met at Crawford?
Yes, met at Crawford. I actually remember the first time I saw Andrel. I had been at Crawford since grade 3, so we were entering high school, and there was like this orientation thing that they had going on the week before, and so my friends and I thought it would be cool to kind of just check out and see, the new mandem and see who's new and what kind of guys were coming to high school with us. And I actually remember seeing Andrel like fully decked out in like just Jamaican colors, like from top to bottom. Like he had on his Jamaican colored shirt, he had his Jamaican colored shoes, and I just remember thinking like, this guy is absolutely lame, like for sure lame.
Yeah, and I do recall, I just saw this little skinny girl with a big head.
Hey.
So that was my first impression of her. So it was interesting.
So past the impression, like when did you guys actually first meet? To the point where you guys saw you were interested, like how did that form?
So throughout high school, we actually never really talked. We had like the same circle of friends, but I mean, I guess he thought I was lame, I thought he was lame. And then it wasn't probably until like grade 11, I had come back from Kingsway because I went to Kingsway for a semester. And at this point, I had missed an entire semester. So when I came back second semester, I felt kind of like everybody had stories that I was just not even prone to knowing. And Andrel's friends had kind of disappeared and went to public school. And so for some reason, we just started hanging out as friends. And it started out as like sitting beside each other at chem class and just randomly texting each other here and there. And then I think by grade 12, it just fully developed into, okay, I guess you're okay, I'll date you.
It's like when you guys like started talking, was it like instant, like this is not like a high school thing, or like did you guys have to like get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, they were kind of in this for the long haul?
No, absolutely not, man. We were very far away from love at first sight, or instantly recognizing that we were the ones for each other. That was something it took some time for. I think it started off as kind of just, hey, this seems like an interesting thing to do. Let's burn some time together. And so we started off, uh, just kind of hanging out, just being friends and laughing and passing each other notes back and forth in class, and just kind of making a whole bunch of uh, annoyances for the teachers. So it was a lot of just us trying to just enjoy each other's company to start. So it definitely didn't start off with us knowing for sure how far it would go.
So then, like, how does that transform in a relationship? Like, when do you know it's a serious thing? Because I think it's very rare, like the love of first sight thing. Like when you see
Mm-hmm.
someone, like this is the person like forever in my life. This is the one God has for me, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how does that form to become like, oh wait, now this is like not just like a thing, a ting.
I think for us, the turning point, well, at least for me, from my perspective, the turning point was maybe after we hit our 2 year mark. And up until that point, everything had been going pretty easy. Like we really enjoyed each other's company. Like we liked hanging out. Like we were having a lot of fun. But then it was at the 2 year mark where things started to kind of, I guess, show itself in terms of our own individual selfishness, where it was like, well, I want to do things this way, and he wants to do things that way, and there are some things that just don't allow for a relationship to thrive. And so we kind of just realized that at that point, for me, it made me realize that I was actually committed to the relationship because I was willing to kind of sit down and get rid of some of that selfishness and see if we can find a point of compromise, like find a point that we can meet each other in the middle. And I think that's when I realized, like, shoot, this might actually be real.
Yeah, I'd agree with that overall. Like I think once we kind of crossed that point, things started taking a turn for where it's like, okay, well, we're pretty serious about this thing. And I think like it's hard for me to specifically target like what that moment was. I think it was more a series of events that kind of took place, where it was kind of like recognizing that she was working towards something and I was working towards something, and we were both like really just helping each other and encouraging each other to keep going towards what it was we were aiming for. So I think as we grew and we started to change and to develop into more looking like what we look like now, because we were very different people back in high school, that's for sure. And so as that kind of started to take place, we were able to help each other to develop in a positive way, and I think we saw a lot of value in each other in that sense. So yeah.
Okay, on that topic, like you just said, you guys were different people in high school. You guys aren't the same people that you are today than you were then. How old were you guys when you guys started dating? Just like when it became official.
Oh, we started dating at 17.
17. So
Mhm.
when you guys started dating then, before that, did you guys ever have kind of like uh, characteristic list in a partner?
I mean, back then, I was a young dude. It was all, does she got a big booty,
Oh my
like that was really it. That was the only criteria.
That was it. That was it, Joe.
That was the criteria, man. It's very
I
simple.
think for me, I definitely had a list of things I was looking for. And at that point in time, Andrel definitely didn't meet any of the criteria. But I think it was just more of you're young, you're in high school, you weren't really taking things as seriously. And I think what I was looking for back then is definitely not what I ended up finding or ended up looking for later on in life. So it definitely evolved and grew.
Yeah, like I think the value, the weighting of just like the characteristics that truly add value, that dramatically changed. Because I mean, at that point in time, I was very just like, like who's the next chick that can look good on my arm, so to speak. Was kind of the goal, which was, of course, it's not like, yes, you want to have someone who you feel comfortable with, and you're not ashamed of walking around with. But I think in terms of just overall weighting of what adds value to a long-term relationship, there's so much more to that. And I didn't recognize that initially. And as we started growing together, and I started maturing mentally and understanding what it is that I was really looking for in someone to, build my life with, I started to see a lot of those characteristics that she already had, and was willing to work towards. So it really worked out well in that sense.
And I
So
think
how
for
do
us,
you,
it's, sorry.
no, go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just say, I think what really started it off for us was the fact that we were friends and that we were comfortable, making jokes together, hanging out, just, confiding in each other. And that really built a strong base for us to start a relationship.
So then, like, how do you know? I think a lot of people struggle with this, like, regularly. How do you know when your list is something that you need to just mature into, like, into changing your list, or you're settling, like, in the characteristics?
Go ahead.
Ooh, that's
That's a tough one.
tough question. Um, whew, that's a toughie. You want to
Hold
go
on.
ahead?
So the question, sorry, Ben. So just to back up, the question is, how do you know that your list is correct effectively? Like
Or like you're growing into it rather than you're settling.
that.
Yeah,
Oh,
because cause pretty much from both of you guys, it was just like you guys. Well, you had one thing, Drell, and like that, you had to literally grow into changing like what you were looking for, and then Krish had those things and grew into them. Whereas Krish had a list, and it was like nothing, but then she realized that her list needed to change. But then like some people have a list, and then the person they meet has nothing, but it actually is a problem.
yeah. No, absolutely. That's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with just having like a longer term vision and outlook. At least for me, it did. So like, I'll give you an example. One of the things that when I started waking up to the realities of, hey, like, you know what, I need someone, and I'll speak specifically to finances. I needed someone who I could count on, to be reliable, that I could basically hand over the keys to the bank, so to speak, and trust that they'll be able to make right and wise decisions with it. And so, one of the things Kryzia and I started doing together was we got a credit card that we shared together, and it was a way of, and I didn't tell her this initially, but it was a way of me getting a feel for what is kind of her general spending habits, to see is this something that I could overall live with? Like, is this something that will be able to, that I won't, will I be waking up in cold sweats at night, was effectively the test. And so, a lot of it was more so when I looked at what I wanted my life to look like in the next 10 years, the next 15 years, the question that I was ultimately asking myself was, well, will this person be able to help me to get to that spot, from a perspective of, will there be peace in my life? Will there be growth? And I think those two things together worked in tandem for me to make that determination in terms of, is she going to be able to help and contribute to that picture of my life that I was ultimately going for. And I think once I started peeling the onion back and having those hard discussions with her, the answer turned out to be yes.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, there's a difference between things you want and things you need in a person. Like it would definitely be nice to have someone who's a millionaire and has lots of money and, can retire me early. Or it would be really nice to have someone, like the superficial materialistic things. Those are wants, but there's a difference between that and need. And I think with Andrel, like what I ended up realizing was he was someone that I didn't necessarily have to change, but if there was something that, might have bothered me or might concern me or might start becoming an issue for me, I was free to have that conversation with him, and he was willing to hear me out. And then we were able to step into a space to see like, okay, is this what changes do we need to make? Are there things that we need to compromise on? Are there things that we need to adjust? And then realizing like there are differences between hills that you need to die on and then hills that you don't need to die on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this is a big question, because ultimately, you probably get to the point where it's like, well, at what point am I compromising to the point that I lose myself? And that's a huge, like, I can say that happened a number of times in our relationship where, I tend to have a more dominant personality in that regard, and so we found that I started to kind of steamroll her a bit, and I didn't really recognize that I was doing it. It was just me kind of doing what I do. And then, once she kind of recognized that she was losing parts of herself, and, it became a whole thing. It became a situation where I had to recognize that, like, we need to, it's not just me who's in this relationship, it's the two of us. So how do we work together to create the best versions of ourselves, whereby we can both be individuals, but we come together with a common goal, a common vision, a common dream and belief in order to make this thing.
And we identify what strengths our individual strengths are and how we can combine those. And then I also identify like our weaknesses and figure out how we can kind of offset those in each other. So it's really just coming together and finding that
common ground, like where we meet and ultimately are able to, as I keep saying, add value to one another.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. That was a big question. I know. Thank you. Thank you guys for that. I guess you guys kind of addressed a little bit, but I'm wondering, because you guys started dating young. It's not that young, but it's still young in the long run. And being 17, there's still a lot of things in the world that they're to learn. And I'm sure there's things you learned and figured out about yourself in the next few years, probably in the next 3 years. By the time you guys are 20, there was a lot of growth that happened biologically, chemically in your brains, etc. And a big thing I've always heard about dating young is that people struggle with growing themselves, because they're changing, their perspective changes as they age, and then they realize that the person they're with is no longer okay with how they see things because they've grown, and how do you grow without sacrificing your relationship? How do you grow yourself without sacrificing that?
I think, and that's absolutely a concern, because I think we even saw at multiple points to this point, points where we just kind of completely started shifting in our thought processes. And I think we were fortunate that we were both kind of growing in the same direction, where we were both trying to continue going towards a similar direction, but not necessarily the exact same spot. But we both knew kind of what it was that we were looking to achieve, and fortunately, we had a similar set of goals and beliefs where we thought that we would still be able to help one another to continue to achieve those things. So, I think overall it was just a matter of we were fortunate that we were still growing together, because a lot of times I've seen this happen where individuals start to have just a different set of beliefs and opinions and values, and it just changes so much to the point where you're just too different to the point where the belief systems can't work together, because they're polar opposites. So opposites attract, but you need some degree of similarity on key points, at least so much so that you can appreciate where the other's coming from, and are willing to work together on creating more of a common ground.
And I think it's not backing away from having that conversation. I think we've had so many different conversations where we've had to talk about some pretty hard things that could potentially end the relationship if we didn't find a common ground. And I think a lot of times when people feel like it's a conversation that, might rock the boat a little bit, they kind of shy away from having those conversations, and they kind of just keep it to themselves, let it kind of boil over, and then eventually it'll rear its head at some point. And I think one of the major shifts in my personal growth was my first year of university. You know, I had all these plans of becoming a doctor and going to med school, and kind of going down that path. And then things kind of shifted for me in terms of my personal life, and I realized like I didn't want to go down that path. And I remember having that conversation with Andra, and like, you know, this is a shift in my vision for my life, like how I want things to turn out. And I just remember Andra being like super supportive of it, and realizing like you need to have those conversations when you feel a shift in your personal life and who you're becoming. Like, you need to have those conversations with your significant other, because they need to be aware of those shifts. Like, they need to be aware that, you know, is there a possibility that our values are kind of going in different directions? Is there a possibility that we're growing in separate directions? Like, we need to kind of figure that at every single stage.
I see. Wow, that makes sense. That makes sense. Being able to address the changes so that you guys can figure out where you're at. So, being together all those years, I know personally, it's that like the longer you're with someone, the more storms you face together. Is there like a practical tip that you guys find that works to get through the storms, especially like when you know like more are coming?
I think communication is the biggest thing.
That's very cliche.
And it's very cliche, but when we get into arguments or disagreements or fights, or we're hitting a rocky patch, I've found that being able to openly talk about it has made all the difference. And on top of that, we've set, I guess you could call, rules for ourselves in how we disagree. So when we're hitting a rough patch and we're in an argument, we've set certain rules to dictate how we communicate in that moment. Because a lot of times when you're in a rough patch or you're fighting, it's really easy to kind of just give into your emotions. And so early on in our relationship, a lot of times when we would hit a rough patch, I would go all out, like full on yelling, cussing, like hands clapping, like all out. And I just remember Andrel telling me straight up, he's like, nah, like that's not how this is gonna fly. Like, that's not how we're gonna speak to each other, regardless of how we're feeling. Because at the end of the day, like, we might be angry right now, but, you know, we won't be angry forever, and we don't want to end up saying or doing things in this moment because of a feeling that can ultimately affect the relationship. And so with the rough patches and the hardships, it's really communication, and it's healthy communication.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think it's a lot of it is easier said than done, right? Like it takes, and I think the biggest thing to recognize for new couples, old couples, whatever, is that when there's a certain aspect of someone's character that like they recognize themselves is a challenge, and they're trying to work through it, and you both are trying to work through it. It's not an instantaneous, you tell me not to do this and I'm not going to do it ever again. Like, it doesn't always happen that way. A lot of it takes like time to, really sink in that, you tell me, hey, don't swear at me when we're upset. Well, it might not be exactly the next time that they're upset that they'll be able to stop doing that. It takes, certain things take time to kind of sink in as they try and work through it. So a lot of it is patience. And there is a thin line between, at what point do you reach the point where you recognize like this is just a part of this person and you can't change that. So I recognize that as well. But I think one of the other things that we've added to our argumentative stage is the debrief afterwards. So every time after we have some kind of an argument, and I'll be 100% honest, a lot of times I don't know where our arguments come from.
My God.
So I just kind of, I need this more for me than anything. I need an opportunity for us to debrief, and there's been a lot of instances where I've flown off the rails, and I've kind of acted extremely irrationally, and in order to understand where those thoughts and feelings are coming from, I've found it to be extremely important for us to like just discuss, okay, what in the heck happened there? Like, why did we fall off the rails? And it helps us to just understand, what is the situational triggers that kind of result in us responding that way to one another when there was no clear justifiable reason for us to do that. And when the reason is very clear, it's nice for us to even just be able to have an opportunity to discuss, hey, like, I didn't like that you did this. And, it made me feel X, Y, and Z way. And, we go from there, and it's an opportunity to kiss and make up and try and make sure that you don't repeat the same mistakes over and over. So,
and when it comes to like rough patches, when it's not an argument and just in general, like something happens, something bad happens in your day, or like, you're just going through a rough patch. I think for me, it's knowing that Andrel's always the first person I want to talk to. And that he should be the first one to know about good things and bad things. Because at the end of the day, I've made a commitment and I've dedicated myself to this relationship, and I've entered into a partnership where we try to share everything from the good to the bad. So like if I'm having a bad day, like Andrel's the first person I'm texting and letting him know like this happened today and I am like super, super upset. And when we come home at the end of the day, like he knows I've had a rough day and he knows how to kind of adjust himself. Or like if something bad happens, he's always the first person that I want to tell or I want to talk to. And I think that all stems back to the fact that we started off as friends, that we built that foundation of friendship that helps us to just want to be the first people to call.
Yeah, and just taking that one step further, it's at least from a guy perspective, from my perspective, I think one of the things that I've struggled with and I'm learning through it right now is just allowing myself to feel stuff and being able to express, that I'm feeling a certain ways about something, and instead of just kind of saying, well, it's kind of whatever, because you tell your boys certain things, and your boys are your boys, and they'll tell you to man up and just keep it pushing. But I think the nice thing about establishing that level of trust with my significant other is that I'm able to express that, hey, like, what, I think I'm feeling this, and I don't understand why. Like, I don't necessarily have to have a reason as to why I'm feeling it, but she helps me sort through those feelings. And I'm very fortunate in that I technically could do that with my guy friends, but it's a completely different dynamic that it adds to our relationship, being able to dissect those feelings with her. So, and that's ultimately built out of a level of trust and openness through communication.
Wow, man, thank you so much for sharing that. That I don't know how much more time you guys have.
No, we have as much time as you need us.
Okay. The next part of the question I just want to ask about, for sure. I know this is gonna be big for a lot of people because it's the hardest thing in a relationship I found myself is long distance. How long were you guys long distance for?
We were long distance for 2 years.
And so you guys have been dating for how long up to that point?
So up until that point, we had been dating for 10, 11, 12, 15, 5 years? 5 years.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so was that a hard part of the relationship, being long distance? Is it as hard as people say?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. No question.
For sure.
I mean, honestly, and I can say this because it's in hindsight for me now. It is such a double-edged sword because it sucks because you don't have the person who you want to be around as often. But I think the other side to it is that for us on a go-forward basis, like we really had to learn how to talk to each other and how to talk to each other and how to recognize just like the verbal cues that kind of tell you a bigger story. And so like now that we're kind of together all the time, it helps us. It's really been such a huge help for us to understand and pick up on things a lot faster than I think we would have necessarily been able to had we been together all the time. So it's a huge double-edged sword, I'd say.
Because you have to understand, like, we had started dating in high school. We went to high school together. We went to university together. So for 5 years, we were together all the time. Like, people at CUC will tell you that Andrel and I were like inseparable when we were going to school. So when we did long distance, it was definitely just a real change, because we went from seeing each other every day to not seeing each other for months. So it was definitely, it sucked at the time, but it also really helped us grow.
And like, how did you guys find it helped you grow? Other than communication, was there anything else that you saw it benefited?
Yeah, like I think the other thing was that we had to genuinely, and I think we've continued to do this even to this day, is we had to set a very specific amount of time together to literally just focus. I think you know, it and especially for us, because we were in two different time zones all the time.
We were.
Like we had to really make the conscious effort to say, you know what, it doesn't matter what else is happening in my day unless, the day goes completely off the walls. This time, and I think the time was 10 o'clock Eastern Standard, that we had dedicated
specifically to be on the phone or to FaceTime.
Exactly, for at least an hour.
For an hour. Because at this point, I was doing my master's, so I was taking an overload of classes, and Andrel was doing his accelerated program, and he was taking like 9 classes that semester. And so it was really easy for us to kind of just go about our day and not really think about, oh, I need to text Andrel or I need to call Andrel. Like, it gets really easy to get busy. And so we made the promise to each other that 10 p.m. Eastern time every day, we would put everything away and just talk for at least an hour, and dedicate that 1 hour out of the day to just, talk about our day, catch up, like what's stressing you, what made you happy today.
Yeah, and even throughout the day, like we would pepper it with, hey, like we would send each other little texts just to say, okay, remind me, I got to tell you X. And that's something we still do to this day, because it just helps us to, when we get to that point in our evening, which we have the flexibility now of moving that specific time around. We know that we have to, we have specific things that we need to discuss in order to make sure that they feel like the other person feels like they're being listened to, and that we're
paying attention to each other.
We care. So.
Because I mean, even now, like us being together, now that we're married, like we literally live in the same house, we sleep in the same bed, but it's still also very easy to kind of just get into your routine and forget to talk.
Yeah.
And we found that was starting to happen maybe the first couple weeks of when we moved in together. That, we go to work, we come home, eat dinner, watch TV, and then go to bed, and then do it all over again tomorrow. But then it kind of clicked on us, like, no, we need to be intentional. Like, we need to intentionally spend time together and talk, because it's so easy to get busy. And I think our long distance relationship really taught us that the value in prioritizing your significant other at a specific time every day.
Not to get comfortable just because you're in person.
Exactly.
So, okay, in closing, last question, for the both of you, looking back, hindsight, is there anything you guys wish you knew when you started dating that you know now?
I don't think I have an answer for that. You go first.
Something that I wish I knew back then. I wish I knew how much work it would be like I think a lot of times it's advertised as, hey, just get together, it'll be dope. But I think it's been a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of learning, and I think even more patience has been the biggest thing. And I think, especially as a guy, like I feel like or at least for myself coming up, like I think it's been a challenge having to learn how to. Um, Females think differently, man. They really do. It's not a joke. I have found that trying to, even when I don't agree in the slightest, how to manage, um, you know, manage that perspective of understanding that, hey, I don't agree with you in the slightest, but I love you and I want to make sure that you feel like I am listening to you, I am hearing you, and figuring out a way to effectively disagree with her in such a way that she still doesn't feel like I'm just railroading her, but we're working through a problem together. And I think that's been one of the biggest struggles is because, I mean, growing up, I have only three younger brothers, and the only woman in my house is my mother. And so for us, like everything was very rough, like just very, you don't disagree with me, I don't care, I'm gonna punch you in the throat. That was the end of it. So now coming into this relationship, having to understand how do I carefully manage that side of things, because she's a much more emotional creature than I am. And so that's been a struggle, and I wish that I had known beforehand that that's something I need to gear up for.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, what I wish I had known back then that might have made things a little bit easier for me and for our relationship was learning how to balance who I am on my own and who I am in my relationship. I think a lot of times as a female, there's almost this expectation like to be the perfect girlfriend or wife. It's this twisted definition of what submission looks like. It's almost like you have to give up yourself completely and just cater to your husband and be whatever he needs and whatever he wants. And there are a lot of instances in our relationship where I felt myself giving into that definition or that ideal and feeling very lost. And because I just kind of felt very lost and very unsure of who I was, it affected our relationship, because ultimately, like, he likes me for who I am, not for who he can make me. And so if I'm losing who I am and I'm unsure of myself, then it's like, well, where are the things that I brought to the relationship, if that makes sense? But I think ultimately, I wish I had known that balance. And I think that it would have saved us a couple of heartaches.
Is there anything you guys would tell any couple starting off, like just a piece of advice that they need to be aware of, especially if they're young?
Piece of advice. How young are they? Are they? I think it's an important question, only because I think as you go through different life stages, it completely changes in terms of what the general life cycle is. Like I think the things that I needed at 17 is completely different from what I needed at 25, right? Like, so it's very different dynamic in that way.
I think like I'm thinking like the age, because I think your relationship starting is actually a common situation that happens in Adventist schools, actually a lot more. It's just because like you're graduating and you kind of known this person for a long time, because Adventist schools relationships, you guys know each other from when you're kids sometimes, and then you're like, oh wait, maybe we'll start dating, and then you guys travel off into another school right after, hopefully the same school. And it's just like that's actually, like, I realize it's kind of a thing that kind of brews a lot in Adventist schools.
Well, if we're speaking specific to Adventist schools, I would say one of the things I've certainly noticed is that it seems like as though there tends to be a tendency to speed up the dating relationship so fast, to the point where you're getting married like the year after high school. And I you know what, that's completely fine. I think everyone's entitled to make that decision, but I think it can create a lot of struggle because there's a lot of things that you have to go through, and there's a lot of changes that happen during those early stages. So like I would personally just encourage people to not feel, and this is unfortunately a thing that happens no matter what. Like, you leave high school and people say, well, what college are you going to? You go to college, they ask you, well, what do you want to be when you're done, right? Like, and then you go from there, and it's like, when are you getting married? There's always this lifestyle inflation, so to speak. So I would encourage people to not rush into getting married just out of pressure, but to do it because the timing is right for you, and you believe that you've hit the things that you need to see within the context of your relationship before you get into it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with your decisions. So to do something as big and far-reaching as getting married with only because your parents are telling you to, I think that's tough. So,
I think it's understanding that there's different timings for everybody, and acknowledging that your relationship has its own timeline, that you shouldn't be comparing it to anybody else's. Like for us, we had been together since grade 12. So when we graduated from university, people were already asking us like, well, when are you guys getting married? You've been together for 4 years. You're done university. It's about time. And we're like, no, like there's still so many things that we need to accomplish on our own before we can come together in that sense. And so we waited until we hit certain personal goals, certain goals as a couple before we decide to get married. And now, the next question after you get married is, well, when are you going to have kids? And we're not planning to have kids until maybe 3-4 years from now, when we feel like it's the right time for us. So it's acknowledging that your relationship has its own timeline, and to also realize that there is such thing as escalation of commitment. Where it's, a lot of people feel like they've invested so much into a relationship that they see all these red flags, or all of these things that it's not sitting well with them, and they feel like, well, I need to make it work because I've invested so much into this relationship. I think I've lost my train of thought, but I think it's just realizing that sometimes your relationship has its own timeline, and that you need to figure out what's best for both of you in a relationship.
That's it for this episode of The Oracle. Thanks again to the Wisdoms for sharing all that you've learned and what you've experienced. Please, as we continue this series, if you know anyone who would love to share and express how they've learned and grown in their relationships that they're currently in, or the relationships they've had in the past or hope to be in, please message the Oracle, and we'd love to feature them on an episode. Continue to do your thing, everyone. Be blessed, and stay tuned for the next episode.